Ethan Caldwell rose from his adjustable steel and glass armchair, gazing out the panoramic window of his penthouse, high above the bustling, neon-drenched streets of Neo-Seattle. The city hummed with endless energy as hovercars glided between towering skyscrapers, their headlights dancing against the perpetual twilight of the metropolis. A fine drizzle fell in glowing sheets, illuminated by the enormous hollow advertisements plastered across building facades, blinking with relentless urgency. He sighed, appreciating the hush of his apartment. The city had grown so large, so loud, that Ethan found solace only in this fortress of solitude. He had chosen the penthouse specifically because it offered the best vantage point, allowing him to watch 1,000 stories unfold below without participating directly in the cacophony. It was a small gift he gave himself, privacy amid chaos. Today was Thursday, the day Ethan's cleaning service always sent its most meticulous staff. Thursdays were the days he looked forward to with an unusual, almost childish excitement. Though fiercely independent in most aspects, he eagerly awaited the ring of his door chime, heralding the arrival of the weekly housekeeping shuttle. More specifically, he anticipated seeing her, Aria, a Levian maid with delicately colored violet skin, pinkish eyes that glowed in the dark, and an otherworldly grace that set her apart from all else in Neo-Seattle. Yet on this particular Thursday, Ethan sensed something different in the air. He could not quite place it. Perhaps it was the unusual swirl of storm clouds in the sky, or the restless static crackling through the city's comm networks. Whatever it was, he shook it off as he walked across his sprawling living room, with its sleek black floors and interactive hollow sculptures perched in the corners. He ran a hand through his short, dark hair, glancing at the digital clock on the far wall. The time to greet Aria was approaching. "Architect, enable privacy protocols," he said, addressing his home's AI system. The walls shimmered. Smart glass tinted itself a shade darker, and the penthouse was sealed from intrusion. Beyond the translucent panels, the city was still bright, still bursting with life. But here, in Ethan's fortress, it felt like another world entirely. He couldn't deny the stirring in his chest. Even though she was simply an employee from the cleaning service, someone tasked with vacuuming the floors, scrubbing countertops, and polishing windows, Aria's presence had begun to fill a void in Ethan's life. For someone at the apex of technological success, he had found no real companionship among humans. Perhaps it was the intensity of his work or the superficial nature of those around him, but he discovered a warm authenticity in Aria that cut through his lonely nights. He had never confessed these feelings. He had kept them hidden, well-guarded as any corporate secret, for fear of seeming sentimental. But the truth was there. Each Thursday, a spark lit in his heart. Soon, the whine of repulsors broke through the hush, heralding the arrival of the cleaning shuttle. Ethan took a final look out the window, bracing himself for his visitor and trying to quell the nervous anticipation that had grown over the weeks. He told himself to be calm, professional, polite, but deep within, he knew that today, something extraordinary was about to happen. The apartment's door chimed, a gentle, melodic sound that reminded Ethan of wind chimes in a distant garden. He strode across the polished floor, pressing a hidden panel near the door. The barrier slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the familiar figure of Aria. She stood there, dressed in a sleek black uniform bearing the logo of the cleaning service, her posture poised yet trembling slightly. Aria's skin possessed that luminous violet hue, more pronounced than usual, and her eyes seemed to glow with a vivid pink intensity that made Ethan's heart skip a beat. The expression on her face was both relieved and anxious, as though she had come seeking sanctuary yet was unsure how to request it. "Welcome, Aria," Ethan said, trying not to stare too intently at her. "You're right on time." She stepped inside, giving a small bow that was customary among certain alien cultures. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice tinged with a slight quaver. "I'm sorry if I appear unwell. It has been a difficult day." It was uncharacteristic of Aria to admit distress. She had always been quiet, yet possessed an unwavering composure. Concerned, Ethan touched her shoulder gently. "Take your time. Would you like some water, or a place to sit down?" She looked up, her eyes flickering with an intensity that caught him off guard. A soft flush, almost magenta in color, graced her cheeks. Her slender fingers tightened around the cleaning supplies she carried, a lightweight vacuum wand, a set of multi-surface scrubbers, and a sophisticated polishing device that hovered just above her hip. "I don't wish to trouble you," she said, "but I appreciate the concern. Actually, Mr. Caldwell, I need to tell you something important before I begin my duties." Ethan nodded, stepping aside and gesturing her into the living room. The overhead lighting adjusted to her presence, bathing them both in a warm glow. "Of course. Let's talk." She walked with measured grace. Despite her slight trembling, she carried herself elegantly, each step seeming almost weightless. Once in the living room, she set her equipment gently on a glass table, then turned to face him, her glowing eyes reflecting the swirling holographic sculptures behind him. "My species, the Levians, follow a certain biological cycle," she said, her voice subdued, yet edged with a note of urgency. "It's been documented in various treaties and health advisories, but it's still not widely understood among humans. This cycle, it can be disruptive and intense." Ethan listened closely, leaning forward. He sensed the importance of her disclosure. "Go on," he encouraged. "I'm here to help if I can." She clasped her hands together, as though gathering courage. "We call it the ascension of need, but many interspecies researchers label it as the Levian mating cycle. It's not just a casual urge. It's powerful, overwhelming, and it can be triggered by deep emotional connections, or even by the mere potential of them." Her words hung in the air, punctuated by the soft hum of the city's distant bustle. Ethan absorbed the revelation with wide eyes, uncertain how to respond at first. He found himself recalling stories of alien biology he'd come across in passing, how certain species had cycles so potent they would travel light years to find the right partner. Aria looked away, that flush intensifying on her cheeks. "I'm very sorry," she said. "I should not have come here in my state. But I had no choice. I couldn't cancel my shift abruptly. I need the credits, and there were no other staff available. Besides, I suppose I trusted you to handle this information discreetly. You have always shown kindness. And now that I'm here, I'm afraid it might be difficult to control." Ethan's voice was soft. "You mean, you're in the middle of this cycle right now?" She nodded, her delicate features tense with worry. "It just started yesterday, and it will intensify for several days. Usually, Levians manage their cycles among their own communities, but I'm far from home, and I owe large debts. My job is essential to keep up with payments. I don't want to endanger you or make you uncomfortable." He swallowed, heart pounding in his chest. A swirl of emotions danced through him: concern, curiosity, a gentle protectiveness. "I'm not uncomfortable," he said, more confidently than he felt. "I want to help, or at least ensure you're safe." She studied him, her pink eyes searching his face. Then, after a beat, she exhaled. "Thank you. I cannot say what form this cycle might take. It might remain subdued if I stay calm. But if my feelings intensify, or if any strong bond triggers them, it becomes a mating frenzy." At those last words, she lowered her gaze, as though ashamed. Ethan reached for her hand in a gesture of reassurance. The contact electrified them both, and she looked up sharply, the luminous pink in her eyes glowing ever brighter. This, Ethan thought, was going to be a day unlike any other. Aria set to work, attempting to uphold her professional obligations, though it was clear her mind lingered elsewhere. She flicked on the vacuum wand, moving it over the polished black floors with practiced elegance. Despite her best efforts to focus, she often paused, her breath hitching, as though grappling with waves of heat coursing through her veins. Ethan watched her from across the room, feeling a profound sympathy for her predicament. He wanted to suggest she abandon her tasks and simply rest, but something about her resolute gaze told him not to rob her of her autonomy. Still, the tension in the room thickened. Every so often, Aria's eyes would meet Ethan's, and a silent, charged moment would pass between them, as if time itself momentarily stilled. At one point, she accidentally dropped the small hover polisher, which clattered to the floor before floating back to her waiting hand. She muttered an apology, clearly distraught over her fraying composure. Ethan crossed the room, approaching her gently. "Don't worry about that," he said, glancing at her trembling hands. "I think the place is already spotless enough. You don't have to push yourself." She stood there, breathing shallowly, chest rising and falling in an agitated rhythm. A flush crept over her violet cheeks, and her eyes glowed so strongly, they almost seemed to illuminate the space around her. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm usually much better at containing it. But you, Mr. Caldwell, I sense something in you that triggers this surge. Perhaps it's your empathy or the sincerity in your gaze. I haven't encountered it before." Ethan felt his pulse quicken, and suddenly, he found himself remembering the countless Thursdays he had spent quietly longing for her visits. He realized, with a start, that it was not merely physical attraction. There was something deeper at play, an unspoken bond that had been forming week by week, a quiet kinship in a city that often lacked genuine warmth. His voice was husky when he spoke. "Aria, he began, but was interrupted by the shrill beep of his communications panel. The penthouse's AI spoke, its neutral tones filling the room. "Sir, your presence is requested at the main entrance. There is an urgent matter regarding an unauthorized approach. Security footage indicates a group of armed individuals on the roof access level." Alarmed, Ethan moved to the nearest console, calling up the visuals. Sure enough, a grainy camera feed revealed a trio of figures in dark, weatherproof cloaks, skulking near the rooftop entrance to the building. One of them appeared to be scanning the door with a handheld device, while another fiddled with a hacking tool. The third, a hulking silhouette, stood guard, a menacing shape in the neon-laced rain. "What is this about?" Ethan wondered aloud. "Architect, do we have any data on these individuals?" "Facial recognition is inconclusive," the AI replied. "Their faces are obscured, and multiple security protocols are being bypassed. Threat level estimated at high." Ethan turned to Aria, who had gone pale. Well, as pale as a violet-skinned alien could appear. Fear flickered in her luminous eyes, and she instinctively took a step back. I recognize that device. It's a specialized bounty hunter's scanner," she said quietly, her voice laced with dread. "They're looking for me. I thought I had more time to pay off the debts my family owes, but apparently not." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Bounty hunters? How did they know to come here, though?" She swallowed, pressing a trembling hand to her forehead. "I have no idea. But if they've tracked me, they must have bribed certain offices, or perhaps the cleaning service's data logs were compromised." The realization sank in. These were no mere intruders. They had come deliberately, hunting an alien woman caught in a precarious debt arrangement. Ethan's jaw tightened in silent fury. He might not have had a personal stake before, but now, Aria's plight had become his own. He glanced at her, noting the fear in her shining eyes, the flush still burning across her cheeks. Despite her vulnerability, she clutched the vacuum wand in one hand, as though ready to defend herself if necessary. "Don't worry," Ethan said softly. "I'll handle this. Just stay behind me." Her eyes widened. "But the bounty hunters are dangerous, Mr. Caldwell. They'll be armed with advanced weaponry, and you could be." "I know," Ethan interjected, voice firm. "But I'm not helpless either. This building is rigged with my own security measures, and I've got a few surprises of my own." He turned back to the console. "Architect, seal all entrances. Initiate lockdown. Deploy defense turrets on the rooftop approach. Non-lethal setting for now." "Affirmative," the AI chirped. "Lockdown initiated. Defense turrets online." Aria watched him in awe. In her eyes shone gratitude and a flickering intensity that reminded Ethan she was still very much in the grip of her cycle. But for the moment, survival took precedence. The bounty hunters would not leave willingly. They would persist until they seized their quarry. And Ethan was determined not to let them. High above the shimmering city, the rooftop of Ethan's building became a stage for confrontation. Automated gun emplacements rose from hidden hatches, targeting the cloaked figures who cursed under the onslaught of stun rounds that crackled through the rain. One hunter managed to roll behind a ventilation shaft, barking orders into a wristcom, while the other two attempted a flanking maneuver. From a security monitor in the living room, Ethan and Aria watched events unfold in real time. The hush of the penthouse was disrupted only by the muted zaps of turrets and the guttural shouts of the intruders echoing through the audio feed. Occasionally, arcs of electric blue energy would flash across the screen as a turret fired a stun bolt. "This is heavier resistance than we anticipated," one hunter snarled on the feed, voice muffled by the storm. "The intel said Caldwell was a recluse, but apparently he's got a damn fortress here." Another voice chimed in, metallic and distorted. No matter. She's worth enough to risk it. Stay focused, and we'll get in. Ethan's lips pressed into a thin line. These bounty hunters reeked of desperation. Clearly, Aria was a lucrative target. Whatever her family owed, it must have been substantial. He glanced at her and saw how she trembled, pressing a hand to her temple as though fighting another wave of heat. I'm sorry, she whispered. I thought I had more time. If you want me to leave, to surrender, maybe they'll go away without harming anyone. He shook his head. Absolutely not. We'll get through this together. I won't let them take you. Her eyes shimmered with gratitude and undisguised yearning. A moment passed, almost an eternity compressed, and he might have reached for her if the console hadn't lit up with urgent warnings. Sir, the AI interrupted. They have disabled the rooftop turrets and are attempting to breach the internal levels. They are well equipped. Then we go to the fallback plan, Ethan declared, stepping to a hidden panel in the wall. A press of his palm opened a concealed armory. Inside were various weapons of sleek, advanced design, non-lethal arms that Ethan had perfected through his own tech ventures. He selected a pulse pistol, calibrating it to a low-intensity stun setting. Aria stared in surprise at the hidden cache. You're prepared for war, she said in wonder, wiping a bead of sweat. If that's what a Levian's bodily reaction was. Off her brow. Ethan offered her a small sidearm designed for smaller hands, which would fit her grip more comfortably. Sometimes, in this city, you have to be. Especially when you're successful enough to attract the attention of opportunists. Here, he added softly, placing the weapon in her palm. It's easy to use. Point and press. But only if you're in danger. She nodded, swallowing hard. He could see the conflict etched in her eyes. Relief that she wasn't alone, mingled with fear of violence, all overlaid by the roiling sensations of her biological cycle. Her posture tensed, and Ethan felt a rush of protectiveness surge through him. The overhead lights flickered red, a sign of infiltration on the lower levels. They've gained access to the secondary corridor, the AI's voice announced, stark and calm. Prepare to defend. A determined glint appeared in Aria's eyes. She shifted her stance, setting aside her cleaning devices and clutching the sidearm with both hands. I'll follow your lead, she murmured. But, my cycle. I can't guarantee I'll remain fully stable if emotions run high. You have to promise me you won't judge me if something happens. A tender look passed across Ethan's face. I promise, he whispered, pressing his palm gently against her cheek. For a moment, she leaned into his touch, her eyes slipping shut. Then they snapped open again, glinting with fresh resolve. Together, they moved out of the living room and into the corridor, guided by the pulsing red lights. The floor beneath them vibrated with the hum of the building's defense systems as they engaged and re-engaged to keep the intruders at bay. Yet from the intermittent bursts of gunfire and echoing blasts, it was clear the hunters were inching closer. Ethan took point, scanning the hallway with his pistol raised. Aria followed, her body taut, carefully controlling her breath. She was no stranger to adversity. Working off her family's burdensome debts had forced her to adapt to a harsh reality. Still, the fear in her eyes betrayed how personal this crisis was. She had no illusions about what fate awaited her if these bounty hunters succeeded in capturing her. As they neared an intersection in the corridor, a door exploded off its hinges, courtesy of a shaped charge. A swirl of smoke poured into the hallway, and a tall figure emerged, brandishing a pulse rifle. Ethan fired a stun blast, the projectile colliding with the intruder's torso in a shower of sparks. The figure jolted backward, but managed to remain upright, armor crackling from the impact. Stand down, Ethan shouted. You're trespassing on private property. State your purpose, or face further consequences. The bounty hunter's visor glowed red. We're here for the Levian. Hand her over, and we'll be gone. Ethan's jaw clenched. She's under my protection. I won't let you hurt her. The intruder laughed, leveling the rifle. Not up to you, Caldwell. A barrage of blue-white pulses lanced out. Ethan ducked behind the corridor's corner, motioning Aria to take cover. The wall panels sizzled, molten slag dripping onto the glossy floor. Blood pounding in his ears, Ethan fired a return volley of stun pulses, forcing the bounty hunter to retreat. Sparks danced in the gloom, illuminating the swirling smoke. Aria pressed herself against the wall, trembling. She risked a glance around the corner, seeing the intruder reeling from Ethan's well-aimed shots. Her violet features hardened with resolve. She raised her own sidearm, carefully aligning the sights. A hush stretched before she squeezed the trigger, sending a slim beam of compressed energy right at the hunter's helm. The intruder groaned, staggering, then sank to one knee, dropping the rifle. Ethan took the opportunity to leap forward, delivering a swift blow that knocked the bounty hunter unconscious. Ethan exhaled, adrenaline surging. He turned to Aria, eyes wide. "You saved me." She lowered the weapon, looking at the unconscious figure. A shudder passed through her, and the glow in her eyes intensified for a moment. I did what was necessary," she said, but her voice quivered. "I can't lose control. I have to stay calm." He reached for her hand. "We'll get through this. Just focus on breathing." She nodded, but the flush on her cheeks spoke volumes. The effort to maintain composure was a battle in itself, and they both knew the other hunters were still out there. The building's corridors seemed endless, each turn potentially harboring more foes. Yet Ethan was determined. These criminals had come to the wrong place, threatening the wrong woman. The pair retreated to a secure area deep within the penthouse, a vault that Ethan had converted into a tech lab and safe room. Its walls were constructed of reinforced alloy, and the entrance was protected by a biometric lock that only Ethan could override. Once inside, the door sealed with a heavy clang, and the room's recessed lights illuminated the sleek array of computer terminals and small prototypes Ethan had designed. Aria gasped, sliding down to sit on a nearby bench, her face shining with perspiration, though whether from exertion or the intensifying of her cycle, Ethan could not tell. Her breath came in sharp pants, Violet's shoulders trembling. He knelt beside her. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "No, just overwhelmed. The cycle grows stronger when we experience heightened emotions, especially fear or the stirrings of deeper feelings." Ethan's heart throbbed at her confession. A part of him yearned to comfort her, to cradle her in his arms until all the fear dissolved. But they were in the middle of a siege. The AI's voice crackled through an overhead speaker. "Two hostile targets remaining. They have bypassed multiple locks and are making their way toward the interior corridors. Estimated time to forced entry, less than 10 minutes. Aria pressed a hand to her forehead, eyes flickering. "I can't let them catch me," she whispered, voice thick with fear. "My father borrowed a large sum from unscrupulous lenders, and the bounty hunters are here to collect me as collateral. I'd be sold into some horrific arrangement, perhaps forced labor, or used as a pawn in alien trafficking. It's unspeakable." Ethan's chest tightened. He reached out, gently laying a hand on her knee. "That won't happen," he said firmly. "We'll figure out a solution for your debts. I have resources." She looked up, tears threatening to well in her glowing eyes. "Why would you do so much for me?" she asked, voice trembling. "We only see each other once a week. I'm just a—" He leaned forward, gently lifting her chin so that she faced him. "You're not just anything," he said. "You've brought a warmth to my life that was missing. You've shown me compassion and curiosity where others have only seen competition or cynicism. And I care about you, Aria." Her lips parted in surprise. A fierce longing sparked across her features, her Levian eyes glowing with an inner fire. She inhaled sharply, as if to speak, but a sudden pounding on the vault door jolted them both into the present threat. The heavy metal reverberated with dull thuds, accompanied by the shriek of an energy torch. Evidently, the bounty hunters had tracked them here. "Time's up," Ethan muttered, standing. "We need a plan." Aria rose unsteadily, one hand gripping the bench for support. Her other hand still clutched the sidearm. "The vault door can hold them for a while, but they'll breach eventually," she said. "We need an advantage." Ethan's eyes drifted to a shelf of prototypes, experimental devices he'd been perfecting. One, in particular, caught his attention, an advanced drone system that could deploy a shield barrier, powered by next-generation microfusion cells. Initially, it was designed for rescue operations in hazardous environments, but it might serve as the perfect defense here. He lifted the device, a compact sphere the size of a grapefruit, etched with shimmering lines of circuitry. "If I can get this drone up and running, it might create a protective dome around us, at least temporarily. We can take the fight to them without being picked off." Aria nodded, striding over to help him with the drone's activation. She pressed trembling fingers against the scanning interface. I can reroute the power couplings, she explained, trying to focus on the mechanics rather than the turmoil inside her. Though with my cycle, my concentration is shot. She managed to smile. Let me try. It'll distract me from everything else. Ethan's hand lingered on hers for a moment. Then he turned to boot up the vault's central console. Behind them, sparks began to fly from the sealed door, the screech of metal even louder. We have to move quickly. Architect, update me on the structural integrity of the vault door. Door integrity at 80% and falling. Estimate 4 minutes until breach, replied the AI calmly. Aria's delicate fingers danced over the drone's panel, reconfiguring power levels. Ethan typed furiously at the console, feeding the system a last-minute override to remove safety limitations, boosting the drone's shielding capability. A hum filled the air, emanating from the sphere, which levitated slightly off the tabletop and pulsed with a faint, bluish glow. That should do it, Ethan breathed, just as the vault door groaned under the force of another blow. Aria nodded, stepping back and bracing herself. Despite the flush in her cheeks, she donned a focused mien, something akin to a warrior's resolute calm. Ready? She asked. Ethan gave a curt nod. Then, pressing a panel on the drone, he activated the device in earnest. At once, a transparent field expanded outward, enveloping the two of them in a shimmering bubble. Within this protective barrier, they could breathe easily, though the hum of the energy field reverberated softly in their ears. The door gave way with a final screech. Sparks rained down, and enstrode the remaining 2 bounty hunters, a lean, wiry figure gripping a compact plasma blade, and a towering brute cradling a large pulse cannon. Their eyes found Ethan and Aria immediately, settling on the improbable shield. One of them, presumably the leader, let out a harsh laugh. Nice trick, Caldwell, but we'll see how long it holds. Ethan lifted his pistol, leveling it at the intruders from within the glowing bubble. Leave now, and you might make it out with your lives, he warned. Otherwise, I make no guarantees. The leader sneered, brandishing the plasma blade. We came a long way for that, Levian. Hand her over, or you'll regret it. Never, Ethan spat. In response, the brute fired his pulse cannon, a thundering discharge that slammed into the shield. The dome flared brilliantly, ripples of energy dancing across its surface, but it held firm, for now. Aria bit her lip, eyes flickering. She could feel the drone straining under the impact, the microfusion cells surging. The other hunter moved to flank them, searching for a vulnerability in the bubble. Pulse shots sizzled through the air, splattering harmlessly against the shield. Inside their protective cocoon, Ethan and Aria stared down the assailants, adrenaline coursing. Still, they knew this standoff couldn't last forever. The drone, innovative as it was, had never been designed for sustained combat. Once the shield failed, they would be exposed. As if sensing this, the bounty hunters pressed their attack, volley after volley of blasts rocking the vault. I can't hold this forever, Ethan muttered, sweat beading on his brow. We need a final move. Aria steadied herself, trying to gather whatever composure she could muster amidst the swirling tides of her cycle. She glanced down at the sidearm in her hand. Then she locked eyes with Ethan, and in that moment, a silent understanding seemed to pass between them. We fight, she said, voice trembling with emotion. Together, summoning every ounce of courage, Aria deactivated the drone shield. In an instant, the energy dome dissolved, exposing them to the hail of incoming fire. Ethan rolled aside, returning fire with precise shots from his stun pistol. Aria, with uncanny grace, darted forward, vaulting over a cluster of crates and landing mere feet from the wiry hunter. She fired her sidearm at close range, the bolt striking the hunter in the shoulder. The figure reeled, hissing in pain. Aria seized the moment to kick the plasma blade from his grip, sending it clattering across the floor. A flash of triumph lit her face, but she gasped as the brute swung his pulse cannon in her direction. Ethan, spotting the danger, lunged forward, slamming into the brute's side. The shot went wide, scorching a wall console, sending sparks flying. The brute snarled, pivoting to slam a heavy fist into Ethan's ribs. Pain exploded across Ethan's torso. He staggered, vision swimming, but forced himself to stay upright and fire a stun blast at near point-blank range. The brute grunted, momentarily dazed. Aria rushed in, fear and fury warring in her eyes. Her cycle flared violently under the emotional onslaught, and she emitted a low, keening sound that was as much a cry of anguish as it was a sign of Levian arousal. She placed a trembling hand on the brute's chest, channeling her species' innate empathic wave, a defense mechanism rarely displayed. The energy rippled outward, and the brute stumbled, disoriented. Yet the effort cost Aria dearly. She cried out, her entire form seeming to burn with that luminescent flush, pink eyes brimming with tears. Ethan, still staggering from the blow to his ribs, caught her as she slumped toward him, the sidearm dropping from her hand. The wiry hunter, though wounded, had retrieved the plasma blade. Gathering his last reserves, he lunged at Aria's back, determined to claim his prize. Ethan saw the lethal arc of the blade approaching and twisted, shielding Aria with his own body. The blade seared the air. For an agonizing second, Ethan felt heat lick across his shoulder. Then, a final burst from Aria's empathic wave rolled through the room, emanating from her entire being like a pulsating star. It slammed into the wiry hunter, sending him sprawling. Sparks danced across his body, and the plasma blade fizzled out. In that moment, the brute also collapsed to his knees, overwhelmed by the aftershocks of Aria's empathic force. Ethan held Aria tight, panting as the pain in his shoulder blazed like fire. Smoke curled from the edges of the blade's near miss. The vault lay in disarray, panels scorched, prototypes scattered, and the two hunters incapacitated on the floor. The only sounds were the crackle of failing electronics, Ethan's ragged breathing, and Aria's trembling sobs. She gripped Ethan's arms, a frantic, desperate look in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she choked, voice raw. "I lost control. I had to. Otherwise, they would have killed us. But my cycle is unstoppable now." He gazed at her, ignoring the throbbing in his shoulder. He could feel the intense heat radiating from her violet skin, as though she were on the brink of fever. Her glowing eyes searched his. Then, unable to resist the primal call of her biology, she leaned in, pressing her lips to his. The kiss was urgent, fueled by adrenaline and an overwhelming outpouring of emotion. For a heartbeat, the universe contracted to that single point of contact. Ethan's pain receded beneath a flood of sensation, her warmth, her taste, the faint electric tingle of her alien physiology. She clutched at him, trembling violently, and he wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. Their moment was fleeting, yet infinite. The overhead lights flickered, and distant sirens wailed in the city. The AI beeped with status alerts, while the incapacitated hunters lay sprawled, still groaning on the floor. Yet for the two of them, locked in this embrace, the world's noise faded into irrelevance. Finally, Aria drew back, tears glistening on her lashes. "Ethan," she whispered, "I never wanted you to be involved in my mess. But now that you are, I can't imagine facing it alone." He pressed a gentle hand to her cheek, marveling at the soft texture of her skin, the luminous hue dancing beneath his fingertips. "Then you won't have to. I want to help in any way I can." Emotion rippled across her face, and for a moment, her pink eyes overflowed with an intensity that stole his breath. "My species," she began, trying to steady herself, "only enters this frenzy around those we sense can share our hearts. It's not random. It's a bond that chooses us both." He wrapped her in his arms, brushing his lips across her brow. "Then let's figure this out, together." Sirens, once distant, now swelled to a resonant pitch. Security drones hovered outside the shattered vault door, scanning the scene and broadcasting instructions in staccato bursts. Local authorities had been alerted by the penthouse's alarm systems, though in Neo-Seattle's labyrinthine bureaucracy, corporate security usually arrived first. A black-clad team of enforcers swept in, weapons drawn. They found Ethan supporting a shaky Aria near the battered remains of his equipment. The two unconscious hunters were swiftly disarmed and cuffed. Paperwork would undoubtedly follow, forms, filings, statements. But for now, the immediate threat was over. Ethan coordinated with the enforcers, ensuring Aria's safety. He also made discreet calls to his legal team, preparing to press charges against the intruders. For her part, Aria stood quietly, arms wrapped around herself, as though the entire ordeal had left her hollowed out. And in many ways, it had. She felt drained, not only from the physical battle, but from the emotional upheaval of unleashing her mating cycle in the midst of danger. Once the commotion subsided, the enforcers politely withdrew, leaving behind only a single investigator who promised to return for a formal statement. Ethan escorted Aria back into the main living area, which, compared to the vault, felt like a place of pristine tranquility. Her steps faltered. The flush of her skin indicated the cycle was still raging within her. But at least she was safe, and for now, the immediate crisis was contained. Ethan summoned the penthouse's medical bot, a hovering sphere equipped with diagnostic scanners. It hovered around him, clicking and whirring as it assessed his injured shoulder. A soft beep indicated the presence of deep tissue burns, and the bot applied a cool mist of regenerative compounds to speed healing. Aria watched, a tortured expression on her face. "If only I could have controlled myself," she murmured. "You wouldn't have been hurt." He waved away her concern. "Better a scorched shoulder than losing you," he replied, voice gentle. "This will heal. And if you hadn't used your empathic surge, we might both be in much worse shape." She bowed her head. "Still, it feels like everything is spiraling out of control. My debts remain. I nearly put your life at risk, and now my cycle rages on." Ethan carefully lowered himself onto the plush sofa, gesturing for her to join him. He felt bone-tired, the adrenaline crash leaving him trembling. But he forced a reassuring smile. "We'll figure it out. I have connections, financial resources. If it's money they want, we can settle the debt legally or negotiate a fair arrangement. I won't let them exploit you." Aria's eyes widened. "I can't possibly ask that of you. My family's debts are enormous." His gaze was unwavering. "You never have to ask. I'm offering." For a long moment, she stared at him, wrestling with conflicting emotions. Gratitude warred with guilt. But as she looked into his earnest expression, she sensed a sincerity that melted her resistance. She sat beside him. "If you do this," she whispered, "I can never repay you." He lifted his uninjured arm, laying it gently across her shoulders. Her violet skin felt feverishly warm beneath his touch. "You already have," he murmured, thinking of how her weekly visits had eased the loneliness of his penthouse existence. "Let's settle the debt, clear your name, and then you can decide what you want your future to hold." She exhaled shakily. The luminous pink in her eyes pulsed, and she leaned into his side, letting out a soft sigh. "Thank you," she whispered. "Perhaps once all this is done, we can discuss what comes next between us." His heart pounded in his chest. "I'd like that," he said quietly, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. The flush of her cheeks intensified, and she rested her head on his shoulder. Outside, the relentless glow of neon lights filtered through the windows, painting the room in shifting hues of purple and gold. Within that cocoon of softened radiance, two souls found momentary solace, forging a bond that transcended species, culture, and the storms raging beyond. Chapter 8: Negotiations and Vengeful Forces. Over the next few days, Ethan wasted no time in mobilizing his legal team to investigate Aria's situation. Holocalls were made, documents obtained, and multiple bureaucratic channels navigated. It turned out the debt originated from a consortium of alien moneylenders who specialized in predatory loans, often targeting vulnerable Levian families. The original principle was modest, but high interest rates had ballooned it to staggering proportions. Aria remained at Ethan's side throughout the process, confined mostly to his penthouse. Her presence soothed his home, bringing a certain warmth to the once sterile environment. He insisted she rest and recover from both the ordeal and her raging cycle, but she insisted on continuing her cleaning duties, seemingly embarrassed to remain idle. Yet whenever she tried to work, a fresh wave of heat would force her to sit, her cheeks glowing, breath unsteady. To ease her distress, Ethan deployed a series of subtle climate controls in the penthouse, lowering the ambient temperature in an attempt to mitigate her fevered condition. He also provided her with herbal supplements reputed to help Levians manage their cycles. It was a delicate dance. Her body craved closeness, emotional and physical, yet she feared succumbing to an intensity that might overwhelm them both. Meanwhile, the legal negotiations were fraught with tension. The moneylenders proved ruthless, demanding extortionate sums under the flimsiest pretext. They refused to drop the bounty on Aria, even after the attempt on Ethan's property ended disastrously for their hired guns. In hushed-tone calls, Ethan threatened them with public exposure, media attention, and a flurry of lawsuits that could cripple their operations. Back and forth the threats flew. Some nights, Ethan worried he was stepping into a firestorm beyond his control, but his resolve never wavered. Each time he saw Aria's forlorn expression, a fresh determination filled him. He would ensure her safety, even if it meant burning through every credit he had. Aria was torn. Part of her felt compelled to leave, to avoid dragging Ethan down with her. But a stronger force, a longing she could no longer dismiss, bound her to him. She found herself gazing at him in quiet moments, heart twisting in her chest. Humans spoke of love, but for Levians, the phenomenon was far more tangible. Her entire body pulsed with a biological imperative, a drive that recognized in Ethan not just a mate, but a partner, someone who saw past her alien features and cherished the soul beneath. One evening, after another fruitless negotiation with the moneylenders, Ethan slumped in his chair, massaging his temples. Aria approached, kneeling beside him, delicate fingers wrapping around his wrist. "How are you?" she asked softly. He mustered a rueful grin. "Tired. Frustrated. But I'm not giving up." Her violet face, illuminated by the flickering lights of the console, softened with compassion. "You've done so much already, risking your finances, reputation, even your life," she murmured. "If it gets worse, I don't want to be the cause of your downfall." Ethan took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I can handle the consequences," he insisted. "None of it matters if I lose you." She inhaled sharply, tears glimmering in her luminous eyes. A wave of desire shuddered through her, born of the cycle's unyielding rhythm and genuine affection. She leaned forward, pressing her face to his shoulder. Gently, he ran a hand through her hair, marveling at the silky texture and the faint glow beneath her skin. They stayed like that for a long while, heartbeats in sync, until the penthouse fell silent except for the hum of electronics and the distant drone of traffic. In the hush, they found a measure of peace, a respite from the swirling chaos beyond. Despite Ethan's desire to keep the entire affair quiet, news traveled swiftly in Neo-Seattle's rumor-driven circuits. Footage from the penthouse's security feeds, capturing the dramatic battle with the bounty hunters, mysteriously leaked onto the city's data forums. Soon, every major news outlet ran the story. Tech mogul defends alien made from ruthless bounty hunters. Public reaction was immediate and polarized. Some hailed Ethan as a hero, praising his defense of an alien worker against exploitative forces. Others decried the violence, or clung to bigoted viewpoints about alien species. In a city that prided itself on interstellar commerce and diversity, the story ignited fierce debates on everything from labor rights to xenophobia. The cleaning service itself scrambled to distance itself from the fiasco. They released a formal statement, claiming ignorance about Aria's situation and emphasizing their policy against employing individuals with outstanding bounties. The statement only fueled public curiosity. Before long, a wave of social media commentary sprang up, championing Aria's case and condemning the moneylenders. A few days after the video went viral, Ethan found his penthouse besieged, not by bounty hunters, but by reporters. Hollow drones hovered outside, capturing images of the rooftop, the scorched vault door, and even glimpses of Aria's silhouette through tinted windows. Ethan's comm line rang incessantly with requests for interviews, talk show appearances, and philanthropic partnerships. Amid this uproar, the moneylenders began to feel the squeeze. Their once covert operations were thrust into the limelight, and they faced mounting scrutiny from authorities who had, until now, turned a blind eye. The threat they posed to Aria diminished as public sentiment grew more sympathetic toward her plight. In a surprising twist, a delegation of Levian diplomats, based in Neo-Seattle to facilitate interspecies trade, contacted Ethan, expressing their support. They, too, had seen the footage and were outraged by the brutality. High-ranking officials requested a private meeting with him, eager to discuss how best to help Aria and others in similar straits. "I didn't plan for any of this," Ethan confessed to Aria, pacing the living room as they awaited the arrival of the Levian delegation. "But if it leads to a positive outcome, if it helps you and other Levians, maybe it's worth it." Aria watched him with a gentle smile, seated in the same chair where he had first welcomed her. "You've done more good than you realize," she said. The flush in her cheeks had receded somewhat, thanks to the respite from constant fear. Yet her cycle still simmered beneath the surface, always ready to surge at a moment of heightened emotion. "Your actions could reshape the way this city views alien workers." A discreet chime signaled the delegation's arrival. Moments later, 3 Levian dignitaries, each with varying shades of violet skin and luminous eyes, stepped into the penthouse. They were accompanied by human officials, all dressed in formal attire. Polite bows were exchanged before they moved to the large table in Ethan's living room. The leader of the Levian trio, an elder statesman with a shimmering silver crest marking his temples, spoke in a resonant voice. "Mr. Caldwell, your defense of Miss Aria has stirred admiration across both human and Levian communities. We come to discuss a resolution for her situation, as well as potential reforms that might prevent others from suffering similarly." Ethan nodded, glancing at Aria, who looked both nervous and hopeful. "I'm honored by your visit," he replied. "Whatever I can do to facilitate a fair outcome, I will." For hours, they deliberated. The Levian diplomats proposed a structured repayment plan for those burdened by predatory loans, combined with an amnesty period backed by Levian consular protection. They assured Ethan that, with sufficient public pressure, the moneylender's practices could be curtailed or even outlawed. Yet the question remained: would the new protocols come soon enough to save Aria from further bounty attempts? The diplomats exchanged glances. "It depends on how swiftly we can move through the city's bureaucratic channels," one diplomat admitted. "Though public sentiment is currently in your favor, Mr. Caldwell, that might expedite things." Aria listened intently, relief beginning to soften her tense features. She risked a glance at Ethan, recalling his promise to use his fortune to clear her debts. Even so, an official solution carried more weight, ensuring her safety in the long run. She wanted not just to survive, but to live free of fear, pursuing her life's aspirations, whatever they might be. As the meeting concluded, the delegates rose, exchanging respectful bows. The elder statesman approached Aria, placing a warm hand on her shoulder. "You have shown courage, my child. May your story mark a turning point for the many Levians who come to this city seeking a better future." Aria's eyes shimmered with unspoken gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "All I want is peace." As the wheels of diplomacy turned, the moneylenders, cornered and enraged, made one last desperate move. They dispatched their most lethal agent, a notorious bounty hunter infamous for never failing to collect. This time, there would be no small team, no subtle infiltration. This hunter would strike with ruthless efficiency, capturing Aria and delivering a chilling message to anyone who dared oppose the syndicate. It happened late one night, under the glow of a rare clear sky in Neo-Seattle. The moon, tinted by atmospheric pollution, shimmered in a pale green hue over the spires of the city. Within Ethan's penthouse, security was tighter than ever, reinforced doors, automated drones, and constant camera sweeps. Even so, the hunter found a way to slip through. Perhaps there was a rogue agent among the city enforcers, or a compromised cleaning service official. However the infiltration occurred, it spelled danger. Aria was dozing in the living room, lulled by the soft music Ethan had put on to help calm her. He was in a nearby control room, scanning the city news feeds to see if any updates had emerged on the negotiations. Suddenly, a flicker in the surveillance system caught his eye, a blurred shape moving past a corridor camera, far too stealthy for a casual intruder. He sprang from his seat. "Architect. Intruder alert. Identify location." Coordinates indicate the intruder is in the main hallway, heading toward the living room, the AI responded. "Security drones have been disabled. Proceed with caution." A chill gripped Ethan. Aria was there, alone. He dashed into the corridor, heart pounding. Rounding the corner, he spotted the silhouette of a lithe figure just steps away from where Aria rested. The figure moved like a phantom, wearing sleek, reflective armor that distorted camera feeds. A multi-bladed weapon glinted in one hand, humming with lethal energy. "Aria, run!" Ethan shouted, raising his pulse pistol. She woke with a start, eyes flying open. In that split second, the hunter lunged, aiming the blade at Aria's throat. Time slowed to a crawl. Ethan squeezed the trigger, but the bounty hunter twisted aside, dodging the stun beam. Aria scrambled backward, her luminous eyes wide with alarm. The figure advanced, ignoring Ethan's next volley, which skittered off the reflective armor with sparks. Ethan threw himself between Aria and the attacker, blocking the downward arc of the blade with his forearm. Agonizing pain lanced through him as the blade bit into flesh, stopping mere inches from Aria's face. Blood trickled, and Ethan grit his teeth, refusing to yield. With a growl, he delivered a point-blank stun shot at the hunter's helmet. It shorted out momentarily, causing the assailant to stagger. Summoning her courage, Aria lunged forward, empathic energy crackling across her skin. But this agent was more prepared than the last group. A modulated helm reactivated, shielding the hunter's mind from Aria's empathic surge. The hunter hissed, twisting free, and Ethan realized this was no ordinary mercenary. The assailant moved with inhuman speed, each motion fluid and precise. If Ethan couldn't subdue this individual quickly, Aria's life was in grave danger. He glanced at Aria, who stood trembling, her cycle flaring hotly from terror. She tried to raise her own sidearm, but her aim was unsteady. The flesh on her cheeks burned a fierce magenta. The hunter saw her vulnerability and struck again, blade flashing in a deadly arc. Ethan flung himself forward, tackling the hunter from behind, sending them both crashing to the floor. The two grappled in a frantic struggle, rolling across the sleek black tiles. Each time Ethan tried to pin the hunter, the figure wriggled free, delivering sharp blows that left Ethan reeling. A savage kick sent Ethan sprawling, his pistol clattering away. The hunter rose, blade held high for a finishing strike. Then, from behind, Aria let out a strangled cry and hurled herself at the mercenary's back, hooking her arm around their neck. Her empathic powers surged again, though this time they clashed with the protective helm in a torrent of sparks. The momentary scramble gave Ethan the chance to retrieve his pistol. He aimed carefully, ignoring the burning pain in his wounded arm. The hunter tried to shake Aria off, pivoting to deliver a punishing elbow to her midsection. In that heart-stopping instant, Ethan fired. The stun bolt tore through the delicate electronics of the mercenary's helm, frying the system. With a strangled gasp, the hunter stiffened. Aria slid free, collapsing to her knees. The figure tottered, then collapsed, the multi-bladed weapon clattering to the floor. Breathing heavily, Ethan crawled to Aria, who was doubled over in pain. A bruise was already forming on her side from the vicious elbow strike. He gathered her in his arms, heart pounding. "It's over," he murmured, though his gaze lingered warily on the motionless bounty hunter. "We're safe." She clung to him, shaking. The cycle, the fear, the violence, it all churned within her like a tempest. Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I can't take this anymore," she whispered. "I'm so tired, so scared." He cradled her, brushing a trembling hand through her hair. "I promise you this ends now," he vowed. "No more running. No more living in fear." The dramatic foiling of the elite bounty hunter made instant headlines. Combined with the ongoing public outcry and diplomatic pressure, the moneylenders' hold on Aria, and countless others, eroded rapidly. In a final blow to their power, Levian officials announced a sweeping crackdown on predatory loans and the practice of placing bounties on innocent debtors. Human authorities, prodded by the intense media coverage, lent their support. Within days, the bounty on Aria was officially rescinded. Other Levians, previously in hiding, stepped forward, emboldened by her story. A wave of reforms took shape, culminating in new regulations that ensured fair treatment for alien workers across the city. The moneylenders, exposed and outmaneuvered, retreated to the shadows, their influence crippled. During this tumultuous period, Ethan spared no expense securing the best medical care for Aria and ensuring the wound on his arm healed properly. His battered penthouse was repaired, reinforced, and upgraded with even more formidable defenses. But the greatest shift was in the atmosphere of the home itself. Aria no longer looked over her shoulder in dread. She ventured to the windows, admiring the city lights without fear of being targeted. She worked alongside Ethan, assisting with philanthropic initiatives to support Levian families in need. Though her cycle still occasionally flared, it did so without the crushing weight of terror. Gradually, she learned to harness and manage it through the emotional stability Ethan offered her. One afternoon, After a lengthy round of interviews with a major news outlet, Ethan and Aria found themselves alone in the penthouse. The place gleamed, newly cleaned and organized, by both the housekeeping service, who were now extremely respectful of Aria's new status, and her own meticulous standards. Ethan walked over to where she stood, gazing out the window at the scintillating skyline. He slipped an arm around her waist, and she leaned into him, sighing contentedly. "So much has changed," she murmured. "For the better, I hope," he replied, pressing his chin lightly atop her head. The faint floral scent of her hair made him smile. She turned to face him, her pink eyes glowing softly. "I used to dread stepping into this city, burdened by debts and fear. But then I met you. I never dreamed you'd risk so much to protect me." He brushed a thumb across her cheek. "I'm just glad you're safe now, and that your situation helped bring about changes for your people." Her gaze flickered. "I owe you everything." He shook his head gently. "No, you owe me nothing. But I would like to ask you something." His hand found hers, fingers entwining with a quiet intimacy. "Will you stay here with me? Not as someone who cleans my apartment, but as my companion? My partner." She inhaled sharply, eyes brimming with emotion. Before she could answer, her cheeks flushed that familiar magenta. Yet this time, it was a flush of joy rather than embarrassment. Her species' mating cycle still coursed through her, but now it had found its rightful place, a bond forged in trust and affection. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will stay." He smiled, relief flooding his features. Bending down, he pressed his lips to hers in a tender kiss, sealing a promise that transcended their many differences. In the soft haze of the penthouse lights, with the city's neon below and the hush of a hopeful future before them, they held each other close, united by a love that defied all barriers. Chapter 12, A New Dawn. Weeks rolled into months, and the reverberations of Aria's story continued to echo throughout Neo-Seattle. In collaboration with Levian dignitaries, Ethan founded a charitable foundation aimed at safeguarding alien laborers from exploitation. Aria took an active role in its day-to-day management, offering first-hand insight into the struggles faced by those like herself. The city adapted, slowly but inexorably. Alien integration improved, championed by citizens who had once been indifferent. The media, always hungry for stories, occasionally checked in on Ethan and Aria, amazed at how a simple housekeeping contract had sparked a revolution in policy and public sentiment. At the penthouse, life settled into a calmer rhythm. Aria's cycle finally reached its conclusion, leaving her balanced and at peace. Yet a sweet echo of that heightened connection lingered between her and Ethan, manifesting in soft smiles and subtle touches. Their bond grew deeper with each passing day. Some evenings, Aria would still don her old cleaning uniform and playfully pretend to dust the shelves, laughing at Ethan's mock indignation. Other times, Ethan would show her the intricacies of his latest tech innovations, delighting in her curiosity. The partnership they forged was more than romantic. It was a meeting of minds, hearts, and dreams. One crisp morning, as a gentle rain pattered against the windows, Aria stood by the kitchen island, preparing a pot of Levian herbal tea, one known for its calming effects. Ethan entered, ruffling his hair dry with a towel after a workout. He approached her from behind, sliding his arms around her waist. "You seem happy today," he remarked, nuzzling her neck. "Any particular reason?" She set down the teapot, turning in his embrace. Her eyes glowed softly, a smile brightening her features. "Yes," she said with a quiet laugh. "I was thinking about how far we've come, how everything once seemed impossible." He nodded, recalling their initial encounters, the hush of the penthouse, the hush of the city's secrets. "It's amazing what a single bond can do," he said. "We stood against bounty hunters, corporate greed, and even the labyrinth of city politics. And we won." Her lips brushed his cheek. "It wasn't just us," she reminded him. "We had help, from the dignitaries, your legal team, and the public who rallied behind us. Still, I suppose it all started here, in these rooms." He smiled. "And it ends here, with us making our own little paradise amid the neon towers." Rain continued to fall, neon reflections dancing across the windows, painting the penthouse in shifting hues. They stood there a moment longer, content, hearts aglow in the sanctuary they had built together. In the months and years that followed, The story of Ethan Caldwell and Aria the Levian Maid became something of a legend in Neo-Seattle. New regulations, shaped by their example, curbed the worst abuses of interspecies labor. Aria's personal narrative, once one of fear and debt, transformed into a beacon of hope for many who arrived in the city with their own dreams. Within the quiet elegance of Ethan's penthouse, life found its tender rhythms. Each morning, they woke side by side, sharing gentle embraces before the day's challenges beckoned. Aria no longer wore the uniform of a cleaning service, but she found new purpose in guiding others towards safety and fair treatment. Ethan, for his part, expanded his tech empire with a renewed sense of responsibility, using his influence to foster innovation that benefited all species, not just the privileged. Occasionally, late at night, they would reminisce about the day she arrived in her mating frenzy, flushed with violet radiance and trembling with uncertainty. They remembered the fear, the danger, and the surge of raw emotion that bound them together under the strobing glare of pulse weapons and the threat of exploitation. And each time, they thanked fate for bringing them together in so unlikely a manner. For though their worlds had once seemed galaxies apart, love had bridged the distance, carrying them toward a dawn as radiant as Aria's glowing eyes. In the hush of those city nights, where the rain fell like liquid stars and the skyline shimmered in restless neon, two souls found an abiding peace. And in the end, as the storms of conflict receded and the promise of a brighter future beckoned, they lived happily, side by side, forging a story that transcended boundaries, proving that in the vast tapestry of life, hearts could unite across any distance, any species, and any storm.